Welcome back to the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. This episode is proudly brought to you by our friends over at Galactic Comics and Collectibles on Hammond Street in Bangor, Maine. But you can visit them at galacticcomicsandcollectibles.com or find them over on social media. But this episode is Josh Winning, acclaimed author of books like The Shadow Glass, Burn the Negative, and his upcoming book, Heads Will Roll, which hit shelves on July 30th. 2024 right here in the United States and a week later in the UK. But Josh is a senior film writer has been a senior film writer at Radio Times and has written for Total Film, Gay Times, Den of Geek, and more. He's been on the set to cover things like The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones. He's even met Kermit the Frog. But no, he's a critically acclaimed author, and one of our favorite books of 2024 so far, Heads Will Roll, hits shelves July 30th. So check this episode out. But before you do, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, all that stuff, as well as subscribe, rate, review, all that stuff on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and all your major podcasting platforms. And as always, you can find much more content over at capesandtights.com. But this episode is Josh Winning, critically acclaimed author of the book Heads Will Roll, hitting shelves July 30th. Enjoy, everyone. Welcome to the podcast, Josh. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honor. And I think you were one of the first people to review Heads Will Roll, so it's like a double honor.
It's one of those weird things, and you get advanced copies of how soon, sometimes publishers, especially on NetGalley, because they send you that email that says you've been approved, enjoy the book, yada yada. Usually it says like tag the publisher in it, so on and so forth. And some of them, like Josh Mallerman's horror movie, it said like do not post anything until June 1st because they want to make sure all of the stuff is in the month of the book release.
Yeah.
And other ones, they just are arbitrary, like whenever you post it. So sometimes I'm like really excited to read a book, and I'm like, let's just get it out there. Let's just get it out there so people I want other people to buy the book. And so like I really liked it, so let's put it out there. And then there's other ones that you try to figure out a month before, 6 weeks before, so it's always difficult. But yeah, I was probably one of the first early ones out there because I was super excited to read it after reading Burn the Negative, and I wanted people to know how good Heads Will Roll was, so I got it out there, and you know what, it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, it's well actually it's on the book cover, which is awesome. So thank you for that. But also it's great for authors because obviously we're quite a nervous people by nature, so it's nice to get a little bit of early sort of approval, I guess. It's probably the best to put it in.
Yeah,
like,
as long as it's good reviews, you don't
it.
want that negative review coming in early. You're like, man, is this how it's gonna go? No. I talked to another author, a writer who has a graphic novel coming out, and I was just like, yeah, is it unnerving reading some of those early reviews? Like, I just worked so long to make this thing. Are people actually going to like this thing? And he was like, yeah, it's a little stressful, but it's good to get those couple good ones. And you're like, okay, there's gonna be negative ones. You know that, Josh. There's gonna be people out there who don't like your book, but that's just, you can't write a book.
But they're wrong.
Exactly. They're other opinions, even if their opinions are wrong. No, because I got villainized on a review I did. I was going through and reading all Stephen King's books, and I'm going to do some reviews and so on them. And I got villainized from a person who emailed me directly, which was kind of interesting. Not a comment on social media or a comment on the website, but an email directly saying that, why do I hate Stephen King? And I was like, oh, that's an interesting statement to make. Why do I hate Stephen King? Because I didn't like the book Cell. I wasn't a fan of the book Cell from Stephen King, and he thought that I should like everything Stephen King wrote, and that I'm never going to be as good as Stephen King, and that's why I didn't like it.
Wow, okay. Someone's drawing some pretty bold conclusions there, I think.
And I was just like, I'm pretty sure that Stephen even himself knows that not every one of his books are going to be extremely well liked. There's probably some books that he wishes he didn't write. And it just, it happens. It's not going to be 100% approval. But yes, getting an early review that's good is always this is good. Okay, we're going to be okay.
Breathe. Yeah, it's going to be okay. That first one. Yeah.
But yeah, so let's jump into like some more like so people who don't know who Josh Winning is, like, have you been a horror fan? Have you been a fan of literature and reading and writing most of your life, or is this something that came up on later in life? A little bit of background on how you got into writing some horror books.
Oh, how far back do you want to go? Because I mean,
Eh,
I pretty
you
much
go ahead as much as you want to do.
okay. I mean, as a kid, I was writing basically,
Okay.
so I started extremely young, and a big thing that I used to do was I would rewrite books that I didn't think that that didn't work for me. So like I would maybe rewrite the ending, or I would take out the scenes that I felt were boring. Obviously nobody saw these apart from my family,
Mhm.
but that's kind of where I started was taking books I loved and then trying to do my version of them. Um, and then also obviously coming up with my own stuff as well. And like if you want to go really back, I was determined to be an Olympic gymnast as a child, and that sadly did not come to be.
You're not competing in the Olympics this summer. It's not your
I'm not competing in the Olympics. No, maybe in the you know back the back aching Olympics. um, but yeah, I think I've always written. I've always loved stories. I've loved stories in all their many different forms. So I never really distinguished between movies and books and TV shows. It was all part of this joyful well of storytelling that I loved and still do love. And so yeah, I kind of have always written. I've always written, and when I was really looking to actually get into publishing and trying to make it as an author after university, I went to see my lecturer to say I wanted to be an author, and she kind of looked at me a bit funny and said, "Well, have you thought about journalism instead?" And I kind of hadn't really, because I equated journalism with newspaper, like hard news, breaking news. Lots of very intelligent people work in those places, and they are extremely well versed in the world in various ways, which I'm sadly not. So I kind of thought about it, and then I realized that actually one of the biggest things that I was ingesting as a consumer was magazines.
Mhm.
Sci-fi movie magazines and like fantasy movie magazines, film magazines, total film. Um, and so that's kind of spurred me into the world of journalism. And I really have really loved being a journalist, especially working as a film journalist, getting to do set visits and interview people and see great films. But I've always wanted to be an author as well. And I think that those two things aren't mutually exclusive. I think that
Mhm.
I wouldn't have made it, if I can say that I've made it, I wouldn't have got this far as an author if I hadn't been a journalist, because I learned so many things about writing and the craft of writing through journalism.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that's that's me on sort of writing. But yeah, horror's always been a huge thing in my life.
Yeah.
Um, Started out with, for me, my early horror stuff was Jim Henson. So
Mhm.
his TV series, The Storyteller, with John Hurt, that there's some really great horror stuff in there. His movies, The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, they've got a great vein of darkness running through them, as do many of those sort of dark fantasy films from the 80s, like Neverending Story. Um, and so, yeah, I've just always loved horror, and that hasn't changed essentially.
It shows in multiple facets of your, the love for storytelling in movies. I mean, if you're think about like the Shadow Glass has that movie connection to it, as well as obviously Burn the Negative does. And then I even wrote in our review about how this like felt like a horror movie in book format with Heads Will Roll. And so it shows and it oozes from it. But your Jim Henson love really oozed out in the Shadow Glass. I'll tell you that much, because that was basically like you were writing a Jim Henson a story in a sense, with the Shadow Glass characters being you know inspired by the Dark Crystal type characters and things like that. And I actually 2 years ago, my wife and I went to New York City on vacation, and there was a art museum there that had a huge Walking Dead exhibit, and I'm a huge Walking Dead fan, so they had like. Lucille from the TV show, and they had like, Daryl's jacket and things like that all on display. They had all 193 issues of the comic book on a wall, which was really kind of cool. And but one of the things they had in a different level of the museum was actual props from the Dark Crystal, which I thought was pretty fascinating to see in real life, to see those things, and
Amazing.
they're creepy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the Skeksis, they are not nice creatures to look at, definitely. We actually had a similar exhibit in London that was for the Netflix series.
Mhm.
It was at the BFI, the British Film Institute, and they had sort of lots of props from the TV show, and it included this amazing book that they'd created for the show that was like a folding triangle book. And the level of detail that they put into those props is just unbelievable. Like the level of love and care um, and dedication that goes into that stuff is just mind blowing. And it can never be anything other than hugely inspiring. You know,
Mhm.
it inspires so many creative people in so many different ways. People who do cosplay, they create these amazing, immaculate costumes based on these properties. So yeah, like yeah, I'm right there with you. It's phenomenal stuff.
It's phenomenal, and it's also I can't believe how I wasn't more scared watching this movies as a kid. I feel like I should have
Oh
been more
yeah.
frightened, but it's also now cross platforms in a sense. And Jim Henson's storytelling is being explored now. And there's a Boom Studios has a comic book series that's come out over the past few years that includes the thing they're re-releasing or releasing new. I can't remember if it's re-releasing or releasing new stuff from the Dark Crystal in comic book format as well coming up here. I just saw in one of the previous catalog. So like this cross, you mentioned the whole storytelling as a whole. I feel like that's the way the world is also moving. It's like books are being written to hopefully be adapted, comics the same way. There's movies being adapted into comic format, or there's still people out there doing novelizations of adaptations of movies, and so on. We talked to Josh Milliken, who just wrote Teleportasm for Shortwave, and they had mentioned as well that he loves doing these adaptations of old horror movies into book format. I think and there's scripted podcasts, regular podcasts. There's audiobooks, there's performance audiobooks. There's just so much more that I feel like it's boil it down, it's a story, and I think that's great. A way to go at it is just telling new stories, and I think that Heads Will Roll could have easily just been written as a script and sold to a Hollywood studio and made into a movie. It would have been wonderful. But reading it in a book format was just so much fun. And I think that you do have this storytelling ability that I love. And there's like I mentioned earlier about Stephen King. There's not a book that some people just don't like. I've read The Shadow Glass Burn the Negative and Heads Will Roll, and they're all phenomenal. So not to make
Thank
your
you.
head really big. I mean, we got to keep it on the
Yeah,
screen here. But
I
yeah, they're
don't
all
believe you. There's
phenomenal.
no
So
chance of that. Denial is the author's
denial.
best friend.
Exactly. But they all have a similar thread, like I mentioned, like the movie connectivity of like the Shadow Glass, and if anybody hasn't read Shadow Glass, it being the props and things coming to life from the movie. It kind of reminded me, honestly, in a such a good way. I don't know why it was this way, of Small Soldiers. Do you remember that movie, Small Soldiers?
Yes,
That like the
yes.
characters that are like these fantasy characters come to life, and try to go to war. And I'm like, that had that like in such a good way. I don't want to say that it's a like diminishing the Shadow Glass, but like in a good way that book had that. But it's characters from a movie, and then you have Burn the Negative, which obviously has that movie connection. And then, like I mentioned, Heads Will Roll. So but they're all different. So they all have that movie thread, in my opinion, but all have their own individual stamp. What makes, in my opinion, or what makes in your opinion, Heads Will Roll that much different than something like Burn the Negative and the Shadow Glass?
That's a really good question. I think Heads Will Roll maybe has more in common with the Shadow Glass than it does Burn the Negative,
Mm-hmm.
weirdly. Um, with Burn the Negative, I was thinking about this recently. It's a book that I wrote during the COVID-19 lockdown in the
Mm-hmm.
UK. And I think that's kind of why it ended up being a road trip kind of book. I was kind of like living my my escapism through that story, like getting out on the road,
Mhm.
not being confined to my tiny London flat with my partner and my cat, just driving each other crazy. Um, and even though Bear the Negative is very much a love letter to 90s horror films like Candyman
Mhm.
and Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and various Winona Ryder properties, I think that it kind of ended up being a bit darker and a bit more of a downer than I originally intended it to be. Like the ending,
Mhm.
I knew the ending was going to be so divisive, and so I'm not surprised at all that some people absolutely hated the ending. Some people loved it, and that's great as well. But it's definitely something, it's an ending that doesn't necessarily inspire much hope. And I think that with Heads Will Roll, I kind of wanted to get more back into the mind frame of hopefulness, which might sound strange for like a slasher novel, but I think that some of my favorite slasher stories are the ones that put character to the fore, um, and ultimately are about survival and are
Mhm.
about overcoming adversity. So I'm a huge, huge Scream fan, and
Mhm.
Scream for me is sort of like, I don't want to be disparaging it, but I mean for me it's kind of like slasher for grown-ups.
Yes.
They're slasher films that are thrillers essentially. You can enjoy Scream as a thriller lover as much as a slasher lover. They've got both of those things going on, and they're all about the characters. The reason I
Mhm.
keep going back to Scream and watching all of them over and over and over again is because they're all about the characters. I love Gail Weathers. I love Sidney Prescott.
Yes.
Um, I love Melissa Barrera. I know they're not coming back for the seventh
Mhm.
film, but I love Melissa Barrera. I loved Jenna Ortega. Um, so it's all about the characters. So with Heads Will Roll, I kind of wanted to write almost like a pure slasher in the Scream mold. Like Burn the Negative, when people very kindly started reviewing it, they were talking about it as a slasher book, and I'd
Mhm.
never really envisioned Burn the Negative as a slasher story. It was more of a it's about cursed film,
Mhm.
it's more in that vein. Whereas with Heads Will Roll, I was like, I'm just going to tell a slasher story now.
Yes.
Um,
It's a slasher story.
yeah, it's 100% slasher. But I also had this feeling of so with Burn the Negative and Heads Will Roll, they were part of a two-book deal with GP Putnam's
Mhm.
Sons in the US. And I was just like absolutely gobsmacked to get a deal with them because they are Penguin Random House, which to me has always been like the end goal of
Mhm.
being an author is to be published by Penguin. And so after Burn the Negative was done and dusted, and I was pitching ideas for the second book in that deal, I was really sort of heartened by how much Putnam really went for the horror. Because even though they were telling me, this is a horror book, this is a horror book, there was a little part of me that was thinking, I think you're going to market this as a thriller. And I don't think that you're actually going to allow it to be a horror book. And they did. They
Mhm.
really, really did. So with Heads Will Roll, I was a bit like, okay, so you're on board for the horror. I wonder how on board you are for like queer horror
Yeah.
and how much you actually would allow me to write an LGBTQ plus story. And they were completely, to my joy. And so that's why the book ended up being the way it is. It's kind of me thinking about what I truly, really want to write and testing to see if Putnam would like allow me to do that. And I feel incredibly grateful that they did and have.
It's I'll tell you one thing as I stutter over my words here. The cover of the US edition is definitely a horror cover.
Yeah,
Dripping blood off of an axe, with some marshmallows
I have it
there.
right here.
Yes, exactly. Let's do that. That's a horror cover for sure. And that's one thing I love about the publishing, book publishing industry over comic book industry, where we also talk on this podcast, is that like the comic book cover is like I used from solicitation, basically. Like the day they announce the comic book, the cover is there to help sell the thing. And I have books like in my queue to read that are like cover to be revealed. It's like the story, the synopsis of what's going on, the publisher, the author, all that stuff. The genre is what's trying to get the initial pre-orders or the initial hype for the book, and then they're like cover reveal. And it's like that's what's cool about it. Because I mean, Heads Roll was on my list of reading, want to read, and then you release the cover for the US edition, which is
Mm.
amazing. But getting
They
while we're
released
in
that
this,
cover.
yes,
They did, sorry, they designed this cover before I had finished writing even I think the first draft of the book. They really wanted to like get it done, get it out there.
yeah,
Um, I don't know what kind of like time deadline
yeah.
situation they had going on, but they did the cover very, very, very early on, and that I've never had that happen before ever. And it weirdly really helped me to calcify in my mind exactly what this thing is that
Yeah.
we're doing. And every draft, every time I was redrafting, I was trying to capture the essence of that cover.
And I laugh sometimes when they put out the temporary covers too, and then they finally put out the real cover, and I'm always like, well, the temporary cover was better. Like, and I think that they learned that. I mean, Nat Cassidy's new book, Rest Stop, they're like, people like the Rest Stop cover so much, they're like, we're just gonna use this cover with some tweaks and put that out there and be
Yeah,
like, this is the cover of the novella. But yeah, it's
yeah.
one of those weird things that like it shouldn't be. We joked last night. My mom's visiting from Connecticut, and we were talking about don't judge a book by its cover. And I'm laughing, and I'm like, as a designer myself, I'm like, no, that's what I first do. Like, I see the cover,
Oh,
if I'm scrolling through the internet and being like, what book's coming out? I'm like, that's a cool cover. I want to read that book, and then I read the synopsis of it. Not
yeah.
that I don't think I've ever read a book solely based on the cover. Like, if the synopsis is not that great, then I'm not gonna be like, well, the cover's cool, so the story might be good. But I think that it does go into play, and I think that both you just mentioned as the author side of it would into play, as well as on our side, who horror books. There's a whole. Not saying that they're the only one. There's romance subcultures and all that stuff. But there's a horror subculture that's really on the rise even right now, where like there's groups of people that all they read is horror novels, and having a horror slasher cover probably did do well for you. It probably did get a number of pre-orders having that cover out there. Uh, uh, um, yeah,
Fingers
hopefully
crossed.
you're like fingers crossed and see. Yeah,
You
right
never
now.
know.
I think as our review, that's what made people order the book. It's,
Oh,
selfishly, I'm going to say,
absolutely.
right? That's only people are buying because of that. But
Yeah.
I mean, as we get in, we're talking here about heads will roll and stuff like that. Do you have like an elevator pitch that you usually talk about what this book is actually about? Or you usually just read what you have on the back of the book or in the jacket?
I pretty much read that like a very brief version of
Yeah,
that, but
yeah.
I've been pitching it as Friday the 13th meets White Lotus, I guess. So it's got the slasher elements, but it's
Yeah.
also got the retreat from the
Mhm.
world, with weird stuff going on with various characters that are very much not at home.
Yes.
They are some almost allowed to behave badly because they're away from
Mhm.
their real lives. Um, but if you want me to go like into more
No,
depth, I can.
no, that works perfect. I mean, I think
Okay, cool.
that I think mainly it's one of the cool things, and I think what I put in our thing is it's a modern twist on a slasher too. Because if you go back and read or watch like Friday the 13th or any of those ones, and before we go too far, Scream is my favorite horror movie, by the way. I'll let you know that right now. I think it's one of the most purest and one of the. I met Roger Jackson, which was one of the experience like No Tomorrow. Listening to him speak like Ghostface was phenomenal and all that stuff. But no,
Oh,
I think Scream is amazing. But if you go back and watch Friday the 13th or these horror movies, they're like, I don't know, there's like the whole summer camp. Like I have to go to a summer camp because I'm a teenager, and it's this, I don't know, this cliche part of it that this modern twist on it of a retreat in the woods for these people that are like have all these issues that they bring that baggage in with them. A summer camp where like camp counselors and campers are there. It's like they're just going to have fun for the summer. No one, and people might have
yeah.
baggage, but they're not a bunch of people with baggage. It's like one or two people might be the outcasts of that baggage. But like having horror story where like even if there was no slasher, this book could have been a horror story just of all the people with their baggage and their secrets.
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like just having a bunch of people with a bunch of baggage in one room or one area for a couple of weeks at a time probably is not the greatest thing.
Yeah,
but
absolutely. Yeah,
but
they're
that
either going to
modern
fix each
twist,
other or kill each other.
yes, that modern twist on a classic slasher or campy slasher was fun too, and the idea that it's a summer camp still, but more of an
Yeah.
adult summer camp. It's also kind of a fun thing. It's not they're not the counselors that are the ones that are the adults there and the kids that are taken care of, or before the kids arrive, they're there for the night before and the slasher comes. This is an adult slasher thing, not an adult as in like a bunch of naked people running around, but like as an adult
Yeah.
slasher story. And I think that's what's cool about it to me too, because it's some people might be like, oh, just another slasher story, but it's like you have to make that twist and make that change in that to make it more a unique twist, a unique stamp on it. And I think you did that by having that back subplot of having the people with problems, people with some
Yeah.
emotional and physical baggage that they bring to this story.
Yeah. I think that sort of like a straightforward slasher would have been fine as well. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that for me, I kind of find it more interesting to dig into something related to popular culture. I think something happened to me when I watched Scream. And actually this actually goes even further back to the Neverending Story, which similarly plays around with structure and with what's real and what isn't real, and the merging of fantasy and reality. Um, but yeah, but specifically Scream, I think it just planted something in me at an impressionable age that was basically wanting to look around at the things I love, look around at popular culture, and just sort of like think about them, just sort of deconstruct them and take them apart and see what makes them interesting and why they work. And um, so I think that whenever I'm writing anything, I am to a certain degree um, playing around with that self-awareness that Scream just completely epitomized in the
Mm-hmm.
most brilliant way. And I'm not sure that I actually I am writing a YA book at the moment. That my agent actually, she said she dared me to take out all of the pop culture references because she worried that they were becoming a little bit of a crutch. And I was a bit like, oh, but that's my thing in my head. But she was completely right because it wasn't in that instance. It wasn't allowing me to truly engage with the characters in a way that would have worked.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, I think there's pros and cons to it completely. But yeah, that's why I couldn't just write
Yes.
just inverted commas a slasher book. It had to have
Yeah.
something a bit more, something else going on under the surface, I think.
Yes. It's I can't remember, and I'm obviously not going to call it out on this recording, but like there was a book I read recently over the past 6 to 8 months that had so many. It was trying to put itself in a position of like this is based in the 80s, and so everything just had like on top of on top of on top of instead of saying the video store, they're like, oh, and Blockbuster. It was like they were
Yeah.
saying these things over and over and over again. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that's a little much. But I do respect and love. I was born in '86, so I'm a product of the '80s, and I love those books that make me go back and think nostalgically, and that's like why I'm really into the Killer VHS series from Shortwave right now. That all of those have that like touch of nostalgic in it, and I love that part of it. And you do, I think you strike a good balance on that, and I think that's in these books. I did love the Shadow Glass because of that. Like it made me go, oh, now I want to watch The Labyrinth and I want to watch, Dark Crystal over again because,
Yeah.
and the Jim Henson Company can thank you for that because, I probably paid for something that, that not directly advertised, but made it so that I wanted to
Yeah.
watch. And same thing now. I'm probably going to go watch Scream again tonight just because after they're talking about this, I'm like, I really want to watch that movie again. And I'll probably
Any
still be
excuse.
surprised at how it turns out. I don't know why. I'll probably still end
Yeah.
the movie going, "Oh wow," because I know how it ends, but like I probably will still be surprised by it somehow.
Yeah.
But yeah, adding those nostalgic reference in it, I think right now. I think it's super popular too. I think a
Yeah.
lot of people don't want to live in the world we live in right now. So a nice little touch of
Yeah.
what we liked when we were like happy, and things were not great, but there was moments when you're a childhood, you're innocent, and things were innocent for you. So listening to pop culture references from the past or even the current stuff is fun to escape the world we live in right now, especially for
Yeah.
us in the US right now. It's not very fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that also there's like a sense of belonging as
Mhm.
well. when I was writing the Shadow Glass, and there's a guild in the Shadow Glass. There's the Shadow Glass Guild of a bunch of fans who love this film, and they will talk about it endlessly, and they all understand each other's references, and they understand each other's I mean, that's it, references. And so it's like, this feeling of coming together as a community, but through writing. And I think Stephen Graham Jones does that.
Mhm.
Like he's the best at that. He is, the king of the slashers. And he does it so, so well. And he does it through the storytelling. He doesn't just throw references in just for the sake of it, which is a risk. And I think there is a line, and you kind of have to feel that line through writing it. It's you can take stuff out. And my editor
Yeah.
did take some references out of Heads Will Roll. And I fought for one of them actually, because I was like, people are going to know what I'm talking about. It's not that niche. Um, so yeah, I think that there is a way of keeping those things
Mhm.
alive through your writing in a way that doesn't feel reductive or exploitative or just nostalgia for nostalgia's sake.
Yes. Steve, you mentioned Stephen Graham Jones. I always tell people that My Heart is a Chainsaw is the perfect book for you if you want to learn more about the slasher horror genre, but don't want to read a actual like book on the history of slasher horror genre. You still want to read a
Yeah.
fiction novel, a horror novel. You want to read that. Read that. My Heart is a Chainsaw because it teaches you about the horror genre, but also is a great story. It's like a mixture of
Yeah.
the two. It's not a
Yeah.
study book, but it's a book that you learn something from as well as get a good story as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are some deep cuts, like deeper than deep. Like he hits
Mhm.
bone. you know,
Yes.
he the references are unbelievable. And I learned stuff, and I've made a list of films that I need to watch based on Stephen Graham Jones's referencing them. So yeah, it's
Why
absolutely
does
like
he
the
find
number
time to
one.
watch these movies? He's too busy writing
I
700
know.
books at the same time. I
Yeah.
don't understand this.
Yeah.
He's another book coming out this month. Um,
Yeah, and
but
he's got
yeah,
another book coming out next year,
yes,
the Buffalo Hunter
Buffalo,
Hunter.
yes.
Like
But
that's
yeah, I was a teenage slasher. So there you go. You got two, I think 2 weeks apart from each other. I think his is the 16th in the United States and yours is the 30th for Heads Will Roll. So this is the month of slashers
yeah.
right here. Pick up both
Yeah,
of them. It's
yeah.
2 weeks apart. You have paychecks in between there, people. You can grab both. Don't worry. It's not going to break your bank.
I'm loving everyone's. A lot of people on Instagram are doing summer ween,
Yeah.
where they're reading horror as part of like a summer camp style
Yeah.
scenario, which is so great. It's really fun.
That's
I'm going to do it
awesome.
one year. Yeah.
And so yeah, so the big thing to me, I felt like, is that anybody who, to me personally, with Heads Will Roll, is one of those things that like if you're not into reading books, like if you're just a horror movie kind of person and so on and so forth, my whole thought was like this could be an entryway, in my opinion, because it reads a lot, like I said, like a horror movie, slasher movie, in a sense, not as much as a horror movie did right now, but like that was like written like a movie.
Yeah.
This has that slasher movie feel. And I've said it multiple times on this podcast is you can't always watch movies. Like you don't have enough time in a day to sit there and watch a movie. You just don't have it. And so having the ability to sit on your deck in the summertime by the lake or whatever and read something is worth it. And this would, I think, scratch that itch for someone. Heads will roll for someone who's just like, I just want to watch a horror movie. Well, this would do it. And I think it's great because I
Mm.
think it's coming out in enough time that if someone wanted to be like, buy it for a gift or something like that for the fall, so that you like, buy it
Yeah.
in July and then have it be ready for you, someone read it and then give it to someone else, or buy a copy for the
Yeah.
October season for Halloween. I think it's perfect in that sense too, because you could have easily just jumped on that board and been like, okay, we're putting it out October 1st. But I like
Yeah.
it coming out in the summer because people have more time to read in the summer, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully. Hopefully.
Exactly. Um, so yeah, Heads of Roll is phenomenal. One thing I wanted to quickly touch on before we were to wrap up here too is that you're from the UK, or you're based in the UK. Were you born and raised in the UK, or
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Is that it's something that I learned a little bit more because I've been getting into novels and books more in the past 2 or 3 years now than I had in previous years, and I've been into comic books for a number of years. And there is such thing as UK printing and US printing and all that stuff, but no one pays attention to that in the comic book industry. Like we don't live in the UK, it doesn't matter to you. But in the book publishing industry, It's gone as far as there's two different covers. There's sometimes
Yeah.
different stuff that comes in some of them, and so on and so forth. What's it like being a UK author having to promote something that it comes out at a certain date in the United States, a certain date in the UK, as well as having different covers to try to push out there? Is it difficult? Is it fun? Like, what's the feel for an author that it's based in the UK, publishing in both US and Canada, UK?
This is my first time. Heads Will Roll is my first time doing it actually,
Okay.
and it's interesting. I think there's a week between the US release and the UK release, and so I think because the US cover has been out for so long, um, we have more assets to share. So we have
Mhm.
the trailer with the US cover. We have various social media things that I can share, with the US cover, and the UK cover I think was revealed about a month or two ago,
Yeah.
and I've only just got my first sort of like finished um copy of it. And it's yeah, it's kind of it's like it's nice. It's like a double dip, you know. It's like I've
Yes.
got two amazing covers. I kind of love people have been DMing me saying, oh, I prefer this one or I prefer that one. How do you feel? And I'm sort of like pleading the fifth slightly because I just think it's awesome. I get one, let alone two, you know. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't really know how it's going to work. I guess I'm just sort of waiting for the UK assets to become available. Then I'll
Yeah.
just start sharing those. That's as mundane as it is, really.
Yeah. Oh, and
Um,
it's different. I do think it's kind of funny. I talked to my Jabron Graham is the proprietor of my local bookstore that I go to, the Briar Patch in my hometown. And I was just in there last week grabbing a book, and I was saying to him because we talked about a couple things, and one of them I think came up as this book and how it kind of annoys me as a person who lives in the United States that sometimes the cover. Oh no, it was he was talking about You Like It Darker, Stephen King's short story book that came out recently, and how he loved the UK cover way more than the US cover. And he was like, it's kind of annoying because it's like, why? And it says, he goes, and it actually happens more often than not that I actually do like the UK cover better. And I'm like, all that does is make me have to try to find a way to get the UK cover. Now I own two
yeah.
copies of the book instead of like in my background of being a comic book fan, buying multiple covers of the same issue. I'm like, now I'm going to start doing that with books. I'm going to be like, I like the
Yeah.
Stephen King UK version. I have to order from a UK person and have it shipped over
Yeah.
and all that stuff. At Heads Will Roll one, it's like has a similar feel, but definitely is different. You know what I mean? Like it still has the
Yeah.
axe on there. It's still, but it's just like a I don't know. It has that. It, it's brighter for one thing because it has more color in it. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a different feel. But I'm like,
Is
I
that is
don't know.
gorier? Is it's
Yes,
weirdly gorier than having a bloody axe. Like it's a massive throat slash, which
yes,
uh I I was like, are we allowed to be
to do
that
this.
gory on the front cover? Like, are people going to start going think about the children and stuff?
Yes.
And I'm gonna get cancelled for my book about cancel culture being
Yes.
too gory.
Hey, it'd be fitting,
Um,
right? Any
I know.
publicity is
It's
good
like,
publicity, right? No.
bring it on, yeah. But actually, it was the Waterstones. Are you have Barnes and Noble, and we have
Yeah.
Waterstones,
Yeah.
and the horror guys at Waterstones really wanted the gory cover. So that's what we went with, and I'm so pleased that we did because the version without the slash throat
Yes.
um, was weirdly more confusing. It was sort
Yeah.
of like, well, what's she looking at? And it just didn't have that same whoa, that kind of like boo kind of reaction.
She's just stargazing.
Um,
Don't worry.
she's just being a stargazer fish.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's
creepy.
not, it's pretty creepy. Yeah. But yeah, it's one of those things that I think that you may not even notice because the axe in on the UK edition is above the title. And so if you didn't have, if she's just looking up, you may even miss the axe altogether. And so
Yeah,
it will just look like, a character looking up to the sky and not actually looking, oh, hey, they're looking at an axe. And then the throat slash may go away. There's more to this cover than meets the eye.
yeah,
And I think that's there. But I think it's really cool. Like I said, I don't know something about it, and that cover looks more vintage too. If you think about it, like it has
yes.
that like that 90s or 80s slasher style to it, whereas the cover for the United States version is more modern, which is kind of cool. So you have a little bit of taste
Hmm.
of both on that, which is awesome. But yeah, I just didn't
I
know
think
if
with
like go ahead.
the UK designer, sorry, my UK publicist, who was sort of very much involved with the cover design, she was referencing Grady Hendrix, and
Mm,
she absolutely loves the My Best Friend's Exorcism cover with that
mm,
faded VHS
yes.
scuzziness going on. So I think that because Grady Hendrix is like he's pretty huge over here,
He's pretty
as
huge
well
in
as
general,
in
but yes.
America. Yeah, it's just he's just. I mean, his books are phenomenal. I love his stuff. Um, he's actually. I agree with Sadie Hartman, Mother Horror, in her book. Is it 100 or 101 books to read before you're murdered? She
Mhm.
says that Grady Hendrix is pretty much responsible for the horror boom because he sort of made it cool and hip and readable and Moorish in a way that is has just taken off in such a huge way, and I kind of agree with that.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, and I also this I don't know if this for sure, but graphic novels are just like huge over here. Whole stores have been rearranged in order to put the graphic novels right near the doors to entice people in.
Mhm.
So I wonder if the kind of graphic novel-ish
Yes.
nature of the UK cover is tapping into that a little bit as well.
It's a big thing all over the I think world right now with graphic novels. I think I as a comic book collector, I'm a single issue kind of guy. I mean, I have a comic book right here, but I think that there's a huge boom in graphic novels because people want that complete story. And I think the big
Mm.
thing about that to me, and as a fan of both comics and novels, I think that that crossover could be huge because people are like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'd like to read these complete stories. But guess what? For years they've been writing complete stories in books for
Yeah,
there's a lot more
exactly.
words, but like I think he can handle it, people. And so it's just kind of funny.
Yeah.
But also seeing authors do the crossover as well. I mean, like we talked a bit before we started about Daniel Kraus. Daniel Kraus has written a number of comic books nowadays, too, as well as an author doing kind of crossing over and doing both. And there's a number of other people out there. I mean, Joe Hill, obviously, being from
Mm.
Maine, Joe Hill, Stephen King's son, that has done that. Stephen King's done it with Gunslinger and things like that. But there's that crossover in that sense. So maybe the opposite will work too. Graphic novels will sell people on some books, and we'll get some more
Yeah,
book readers out of it, so on and so forth. Have you ever wanted to write a comic book
hopefully.
or a graphic novel?
I've been too scared to, because I just know that it's just such a completely different medium
It is.
that I just wouldn't know where to begin, to be honest. I'd rather leave it to the professionals.
Well, I've always said, even being a fan of it, I've always been like, I probably could get together with someone who is great at scripting a comic book and actually like putting the word bubbles together and all that stuff, and come up with a plot and an overall arching idea. Like I could probably write the story, and it's something you're probably really good at. It's like, okay, this is what's going to go on, and then you hand it off to someone else who's really good at scripting a comic book and putting pages together and making sure that the jump scares are on the next page and yada 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 and so on and so
Right.
forth. But like it's Josh Winning and someone else because you're like I come up with the idea and then someone else is the one that's finishing the thing. I feel like I'd be good at
Yeah.
that. I don't think I'd be actually good at crafting the physical, where speech bubbles are and all that stuff. I don't think I'd be good at that. Overall arching
Yeah.
ideas is probably more my my forte. And someone who writes books for a living, it's probably that too for most people. Is like I can come up with the idea for it, but someone else actually write the comic book.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Maybe I
Yeah.
should not maybe I should start thinking about that for real.
Um,
I love sort of visual media like
yeah.
that. I think that the sheer amount of amazing art within one comic book is sort of mind-blowing.
Mhm.
So that is very appealing. But
And
yeah, I
and
wouldn't
some of
even
your
know what the
stuff,
document looks
Shadow
like.
Glass would be great if just adapted it into a
I would
comic book or
love
graphic
that.
novel. That would be fantastic in my opinion. I some people are out there going, I can't wait for this to become a movie. It's like sometimes I'm just like,
Yeah.
well, maybe someone will adapt it into comic book format. That'd be great too.
Yeah. I
They
I would absolutely love that.
see that. See, and you get to see all the
Yeah.
different characters on panels. That'd be great. But no, um,
Yeah.
but Heads Will Roll is definitely you've grown. You can tell the Shadow Glass is wonderful. Absolutely love it. To me, Burn the Negative was like that slightly bit better, and then now Heads and Rolls. What I'm saying. Like you've grown, and you can show it through your novels that they've grown into better and better and better novels. So the next one's gonna be like perfect, award winning. No, let's hope that Heads Will
Yeah.
Roll wins awards. I'm not talking about
I should
next
probably start
one.
writing that one.
Exactly right now. But
Yeah.
yeah, so thinking of that, I mean, you have Heads Will Roll coming out in the US. I think it's July 30th. The UK is a week later. It's in August, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. 8th of August.
Yeah, 8th of August, and it's my anniversary. In
Ah, congratulations.
fitting, yeah, thank you. But
Yeah.
the book has a role. Burn the Negative just hit the paperback. which is
Yes.
cool. It must be like nice little surge too, and seeing people who wait in the comic book industry. You do have people
Yes.
who trade wait, so you wait for those issues to come out in trade paperback. The same thing in the published book publishing. People are like, hardcover's too expensive. I'll wait till it comes out in paperback, and they wait for
And
paperback.
I say fair enough, frankly.
And then so like the paperback came out at the end of May in the United States. I don't know if it was just the United States or if it hit everywhere too, but I know it's
Yeah,
available in
it's
paperback.
worldwide.
Okay. And then
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Shadow Glass is out too, available still. I think it's still in print, right?
It sure is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's imprint. Yeah, yeah.
I
It
recommend
feels nice
all
to
of
have
them.
three. Thank
Yeah,
you.
exactly. It feels nice to have
It
three
feels
out
nice
there.
to
Yeah.
have three under my belt, and it's sort of like, okay, that feels like something that readers kind of can figure out who I am
Mhm.
from, hopefully. It's all about the brand. So you kind of want to have a number of options for somebody to look at to go, oh, I think I can figure out what this stuff's going to be.
It's nice because again, I think that you have your Josh Winning stamp on all of them, but not they're all different. And it's one of those things
Mm,
that I talk to some of the authors. I'm like, there's some books that even Daniel Kraus we talked about earlier. He's like, I write a different book every time I write a book. Like it's completely different. It's like different genre, different. Like it's just completely different. And so there's some people who will love Whalefall, but are not gonna like this book that he has coming
yeah.
out, Pay the Piper. It's just they're just not the same. But I feel like yours have a thread that goes through it that goes, okay, this is a Josh book, and I like it, and I like the
Mm,
storytelling ability you have. But each one has their own stamp on it, so you're not just like, oh, okay, I'm tired of him telling the same story over again. This is
yeah.
a
Stop talking
different
about
story.
Scream.
Exactly, exactly. But they're different, and so that's pretty cool. So you mentioned as we finish up here, you mentioned your two book deal. Is obviously this is the end of it. You mentioned a young adult book.
Mm.
Not that you have to share anything because obviously things there's NDAs, there's things you don't want to announce yet, and so on and so forth. But are you currently working on things like this young adult thing?
I'm working on two things. Yeah, deadlines are catching up with me slightly, but obviously very grateful to be working.
Yes.
But yes, I'm working on two things. I've got this YA book that I'm really enjoying. It's been painful in places. I mean, I had the idea in like 2000 and I want to say 18.
Mhm.
Like it's been a while coming, and the first draft I wrote was kind of in the wrong genre, and then the second draft didn't quite have all the right pieces. So now I'm into the third draft where I'm really hoping that this is the one that's going to actually stick.
Mhm.
So that will be going out on submission at some point this year, I think, hopefully. And then I'm also working on another adult book, which I'm not allowed to talk about,
Yeah.
but again, it's like it actually is. It's um, a bit of a departure from the three books I have already, my adult books. But hopefully, it still taps into something that people will enjoy. So
I
yeah,
think
we'll
also
see.
with you mentioned the three books. I think also nowadays there's this um um thing that not to talk about Daniel again, but Daniel has like people who just buy his book, they like his writing. It doesn't matter if it's the same genre. And
Mm,
I think with three books now and having people be able to read three books, no matter what you come out with after this, there's gonna be fans of your books. Like there's gonna be like, I'm gonna buy anything this person comes out with, whether you wrote a young adult superhero book. Someone would still probably read it because of the fact that you're writing it. And I think that's what's cool having that three
mm.
books on the shelves and people have the ability to read your stuff right now. And the audiobooks are great too. I haven't, I don't
Oh
know if
yeah,
it's heads of a roll getting an audiobook. I'm guessing it is, but
yeah.
I haven't heard that obviously yet, but like the Shadow Glass audiobooks are phenomenal, and the Burn the Negative
Mhm.
one is phenomenal as well because I do a little bit of hybrid reading. And when I read, I do it
Oh
in the
cool.
car reading it on audiobook, and then when I'm at home, I read the physical novel, and so on and so forth. So yes,
Yeah,
there's audiobooks are fun, and I
yeah,
think more people will read if they actually read audiobooks, which is pretty cool.
yeah. I actually always tell people to listen to Burn the Negative.
Yes.
Even though the designer Laura Corliss, she designed the interior of Burn the Negative, and she created like a piece of art, like it's just phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
I say that the narrator Stephanie Cannon for the audiobook did such an amazing job with all the different voices and just the tone of the book. She
Mm-hmm.
nailed it perfectly. So if even if you're not sure about audiobooks, I would say that she does fantastic work. So check out anything that she's done,
Yeah.
basically.
And you can pre-order. We always like to promote Libro FM is a place you can get audiobooks, which is amazing. They support local bookstores and things like that, so they're available on there,
Mhm.
which is amazing. And you own the rights to them. You purchased it, you download it, it's yours, which is
Right,
a huge
forever.
thing nowadays because digital media. I don't think a lot of people understand when you download something on Amazon Prime that they lose the rights to it, then you lose the rights to it, and you just pay money for nothing. And so
It's
the cool,
terrible. It's
yes,
such a
it's awful.
bad model.
Oh, it's so bad. So that's the great thing. It supports local bookstores as well as you actually own the media yourself. So you can put it on your phone. You can put it on. It's great to have that option. But I do recommend the same thing. I've done it before, where I've like opened up a book and read the book as someone was reading to me in my ear because I still want
Mm.
the experience of reading it. But most of the time, it's read a few chapters in the car driving to work, read a few chapters physically, and then back and forth and so on and so
Oh,
forth. It
interesting.
can get annoying because you're trying to find where you were in the book,
Yeah.
but holding a physical book as something, I don't know, I feel like I can ingest it a little bit more when you hold a little physical book than you can even digital
Mm.
on an iPad or something. But heads roll,
That's a
it's
clever
July.
way to
Yeah, go ahead.
that's a clever way to read is to basically make sure you're reading 24/7, through various
I'm
different
doing the
mediums.
dishes. I
Yeah, yeah.
AirPods and I'm doing the dishes because my wife, we have two kids. They have a 4 month old and a 3 month old, a 3 year old.
Oh
But
wow.
my mom, like my wife might be doing bath time with a 3 year old while the 4 month old's sleeping, and so I'm in the kitchen doing dishes, and it's like, well, no one else is in here, so I pop an audiobook in, and you're not really focusing on much. You're doing dishes, you're loading the dishwasher or
Yeah.
whatever, and I have that in my background. If I'm driving to work, same thing. If I'm anything like that, I'm just like, oh, I've watched basketball games. I watched the Celtics in the championship with the volume on mute and an audiobook in because I'm like, I want to finish
Oh
this
wow.
book. But I also
Yeah.
want to see my Celtics win the championship. So I'm like, what do I do? I'm in a predicament here. But yeah, I've done it. And people were like, how do you read so many books? I'm like, that's one way to do it is like, I try to fill every moment with it and,
Yeah.
so on. So I'm not scrolling through Instagram, I'm reading a novel or listening to it. So yeah, it's a fun way to do it. And you get to see that because I think that there is something to be said. The big thing to me, Josh, is if you have a name it's hard to pronounce in your book, someone
Oh
reads it to
yeah.
you in your ear and you now know how to pronounce it without having to be like, I think that's how you say it. That's a
Yeah.
big one to me, is that stuff. And also the accents is great. It helps you kind of, if someone does like an accent
Hmm.
or a different voice, it helps you kind of separate characters in that. Which the final thing I'll say is, I think one of the things I have a problem with reading is there's a lot of characters in a book. It's hard to keep track of them, and I think that you did an excellent job developing and creating the characters that are in Hensel Role enough that I could tell who is who and where they are and all that stuff. I think
Yeah.
sometimes people just jump from character to character, or have so many characters in one chapter that you're just like, who is that person again? And I think you did an excellent
Yeah.
job on developing
Oh,
those
thanks.
characters and creating different personalities so you kind of understood who's who. It's like they're
Yeah.
not just all one
That's
amalgam of a character.
I take no credit for that actually. That was my editor's advice. I initially had more I think I had a few more counselors and a
Mhm.
couple more, maybe one or two more campers, and we just refined them back. And then we tried to come up with sort of like memorable, um, sort of like what's the word? Like sort of templates, I guess, like
Mm.
things that were memorable in like a very quick shorthand kind of way. So, um, Kurt's the sneezy young one, Danny's sort of like the love interest, and then you have Buck and Cat who are like the stoner duo. So if you
Mhm.
can find little ways to give them like a shorthand for the reader, I think that really helps. And I'm similar. Like I find it almost impossible to keep track of a massive cast of characters as a reader, let alone as a writer. So I think, yeah, any of those little tricks are for me like perfect.
Yes, exactly. And I said, and that the audiobooks does wonders in that sense too, because
Yeah,
if there's multiple people reading it, even better. But if there's one person reading it who is very good at doing different voices, just the slightest difference, if I start with that and then go over to the book that has a bunch of characters in it, at least that way I have in my mind, I go, okay, this is what this person sounds like, and this is what this person sounds like. So when I read them differently in the
yeah.
book, I can get that in my head and so on. But yeah, I think that there's a weird divide against people who think that whether or not audiobooks actually reading it doesn't really matter. We just talked about off the top of this
Oh
podcast
yeah,
episode, which was like it's still a storytelling. So that's you're telling a story. Just because your story is in a print novel format doesn't mean it's not a story. And so I think that
absolutely.
having someone read it to you is no different. I mean, I read books to my son. Is he not reading the books? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like
It's-
you're just putting the story in a different orifice.
yes, and you're getting it to someone.
Rather
That's all. You're selling a
yeah,
book, and that's your goal. I mean, you're an author. You're trying to make a living here. As long as someone's buying the book, does it really matter what format they buy it in? Hardcover, paperback, or audiobook? It's
yeah,
like you wrote the story for people to read it. Yes, you want to make money and have a living, but you did write the story not for you to love. It's for other people to read. And so whether or not they
yeah,
listen to an audiobook or they read the actual book, they're still ingesting the story. Just as long as they paid for it.
absolutely.
That's all that important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm renting it from the library is fine, but I'm saying like don't steal it
Yeah.
from the internet is what my point is here
Oh
is
no,
to, is
don't
to
do that.
pay for the book. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and talking Heads Will Roll. I burned the negative a little bit and even the shadow glass and horror movies and horror genre in general. You're a busy person, and I hope you got a good break from editing there to come talk with us a little bit about
Oh,
your
absolutely.
books.
Oh,
I
it's a joy.
appreciate
I love talking to people who love the same stuff that I love. So meeting you talking about Scream and
yes.
Jim Henson, that is just for me absolutely golden. So thank you.
No problem at all. I was jokingly, my mom is watching my daughter right now, and I was joking because my uncle lives in the UK, and I was like, "You think Josh knows my uncle?" No, just kidding.
Yeah.
It's a small
We all
world,
know
right?
each other.
My brother, my parents always talk. We live in Maine, and you go to somewhere else in the country, anywhere else in the world, and someone goes, "Oh, you live in Maine? Do you know so and so?" We're always like, "Oh my gosh, we're a small state. I understand." Yeah, actually, we do know that person. Like, it's the funniest thing. We're always like, "No, actually, I do. They're my neighbor. They live down the street." And so I was laughing about how you're in the UK. I'd be like, oh, I wonder if he knows my Uncle John. Oh, yeah, he's actually my neighbor. That's pretty
Wait, I know
crazy.
John. Yeah.
No, but I really appreciate you
Is
coming
that
on and
American
chatting.
guy?
He's that American guy, right? Yeah. Well, he's lived in
Yeah.
the UK for like, I don't know, 30 years now. So I don't even know if he would be that American guy anymore. He's been there for a long time. I haven't seen him in years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us. It's always fun to talk to someone that I love their writing and enjoy. It would be very not fun, I guess, if I hated your
Yeah.
I don't
No,
know how long you would have
that's
stayed
the
on here
most
with me.
some of the most awkward interviews I've ever had. When I've been interviewing as a journalist,
Yes.
I've interviewed actors where we've watched the film immediately before the interview, gone to the interview room. The film wasn't very good. I know it's not good. The actor knows it's not good. And then you've got to talk about the film. And that is just uncomfortable for everybody involved. So,
And you're trying not to
not
just crap on
recommended.
everything. You're like, yeah,
Yeah.
so what went into the decision of doing the voice that way? That's not very fun.
Yeah.
I've had
You
that
know, it's
happen here
bad when they
too.
don't say, did you
Yeah,
enjoy the movie? It's like, if they don't say that, then you know that they know it's bad.
that's awesome. But yeah, I really appreciate it. And we'll talk soon again at some time in the future.
Yeah.
We'll have you back on. Thanks,
Thanks
Josh.
so much for having me.